Thanks, Bob. So, Bob, thanks to you and everybody and all the hosts here for giving me the chance to speak here. As you said, my name is Eric Marsh. I'm the executive director of PDG, the Partnership for DSTSA Governance. And it's come up a number of times through the last day and a half, but just so that folks know, PDG is a collaborative of industry solution providers and other interested stakeholders, about 70 organizations throughout the supply chain, including large and small dispensers, manufacturers, and wholesalers, as well as a number of solution providers, uh, focused on developing a blueprint and a vision towards interoperability for 2023 and sustaining that beyond. Um, we are a formal public-private partnership with FDA, and so we do collaborate closely with FDA in our work, and they're active participants in our work. Uh, they do not, formally approve or endorse, so please do not take any of this as gospel from the agency, but do know that they are active participants in our work and in our dialogue. I'll be talking here today primarily about our blueprint for interoperability in 2023. So PDG was created to provide that independent, balanced, sector-neutral forum where industry could come together and cast a shared vision for how interoperability can work in 2023. And it's really got a couple of parts to it. One is just consolidating and putting together the pieces that you've heard about from OCI and GS1 and the VRS work group and a number of the other places that this work has taken place over the years. And then the other is some new work where things were not covered by other groups, where PDG has stepped in to develop them. I often kind of think about PDG as kind of putting the plan for a car together. Our charge was to say, hey, what's the blueprint for how you build a car? If somebody already has specifications for how you build a transmission and how you do tires, we're just going to leverage that. We're going to make use of that. We're not here to recreate that work or second guess it, but rather to fold it into that overarching vision for how you put a car together. And if nobody's tackled windshields, well, then PDG is in a position where we can step in and start to define what a windshield looks like. And so it's kind of part pulling together the work that's already underway and being done through other groups and casting that overall framework, as well as kind of trying to fill in those gaps a little bit. Our first chapter of our blueprint is published about a year ago and is available on the website, the link you can see on the screen here, and really focuses on the what. So the compliance and business requirements and recommendations for 2023 of the group, kind of split out by the buckets. I think folks often think about TI exchange, verification, tracing, and credentialing. The group is continuing to work on five additional chapters, more focused on the functional design components implementing those business and compliance requirements. And those should be coming out in the coming weeks. And so you should hopefully see communications around those. Watch us online and on LinkedIn, et cetera, and we'll be sharing and posting those new chapters here very soon. Bob, you have been instrumental in the group in terms of helping us put those additional chapters together. So I won't put you on the spot, but do welcome you kind of jumping in through this presentation if there are pieces about that work that you think are worth highlighting. I will
Sure.
emphasize our PDG blueprint is not a legal document, right? It's not a legal interpretation. We don't have regulatory authority. What it is, as I often say, is right a group of 70 really smart organizations who've been active in this space, coming together and defining what they believe is the most efficient, effective way to get to interoperability in 2023. Uh, we do have a process where we continue to encourage feedback. So on that blueprint page of our website, you'll see a change request form. So if you're going through this and you say, man, you didn't address this, or you got that piece wrong, or you should improve this piece, we do have a formal change request process where you can fill out a form, suggest or propose changes or additions to the blueprint, and then we'll run that through our committee and work group process to get those addressed and considered, and if appropriate, incorporated into the next version of our blueprint document. So hopefully that just gives a little bit of a level set of who PDG is, what our blueprint is, and really the focus of this conversation will be providing on kind of a high level orientation to that blueprint and what is in it. So as I said, we really organize the blueprint and our work in PDG around those four buckets: TI exchange, verification, tracing, and credentialing. On the TI exchange, I'll breeze through the requirements because I think we've talked about them, and I know there's another session coming up. But when we talk about TI exchange, it's really that component about providing the transaction information and transaction statement, capturing it and maintaining it for 6 years, and doing so in a secure electronic interoperable manner that incorporates the product identifier at the package level. Again, I know this has been talked about a little bit, but just emphasizing here, right, it's really that serial number and expiration date component that gets added to the transaction information in 2023 to incorporate that product identifier. As far as the blueprint, what you'll see in chapter 1 is kind of a laundry list of proposed, either required or recommended, standardized TI element formats. So we heard a lot about GS1 EPCIS standards, right, which define some of the fields. We tried to go another layer deeper on that and actually pull together some of the existing standards and align around some of the existing standards of how the data in those various fields gets formatted. So, for example, one of the fields in a TI is name and business address. And we point to and recommend, not require on this particular one, but recommend the use of some of the US postal code standards around how you format an address in a business name. Similarly, on container package type, we leverage some of the existing dispenser standards to point to an existing standard that's recommended for how you format those individual fields or data elements of the TI. And then it also has a good section in it around kind of expectations for the accuracy and reliability of that TI. How do you identify and assure that the data in the TI actually matches or aligns to that physical product? So that's kind of the first chapter of the blueprint that's out and available on the website on the left-hand side there. Some things that we're working on that you'll see rolled out in the coming weeks and in the new chapter here. Similar to the EPCS memorization that you just heard, some of the different distribution models, so drop ships, 340B, direct ships, some of those models. We have functional data flow designs for how to approach those. We also really emphasize this two-channel approach or optionality for data exchange. I think everyone, particularly in the manufacturer and wholesaler space, right, is really strongly aligned around EPCIS, as we just heard. And certainly, I think we recognize EPCS as the preferred approach. But there's also a recognition that, particularly at that dispenser level, not everyone may have that interest or capability to receive a push of data by an EPCS message. So we walk through a little bit of information around the use of web portals to make that data available. And so really emphasizing that while EPCS is certainly the preferred approach and the preferred standard, that web portal option is available as well. And then also some work in that new chapter that you'll see around misalignment exception resolution. So when that physical product and the data have a discrepancy between them, how you resolve that. HDA led some great work around that process, emphasizing the manufacturer to wholesaler component and how they'll resolve those errors. PDG kind of tried to take that, generalize it, and extend that same framework on down to the dispensers to help you think through and walk through how you will be in a position to try to resolve those exceptions when they arise. So that's kind of some background on the serialized TI exchange component of the blueprint. The next piece, as I mentioned then, is the interoperable verification component. And as you know, kind of the statute really says if there's a request from an authorized trading partner who has possession or control of the product, the manufacturer, or sometimes repackager, but typically the manufacturer, has a statutory obligation to respond to that verification request within 24 hours. And we've seen in certain circumstances business expectations for much faster turnaround times here. And again, requirement for it to be in that electronic, interoperable, secure process or system by 2023. Folks have heard and talked here already, right, about the VRS model. We kind of endorse that model through our PDG Blueprint and recommend a couple of kind of modest enhancements to extend it beyond the current use case of saleable returns and incorporate additional use cases. Like suspect and illegitimate product, or in the case of a recall, or for other purposes that you may want to verify product. We also address a number of ways in which serial number statuses get used. So I haven't heard this come up as much, but it's been a big topic of conversation in industry, and it essentially boils down to, hey, if you know that a particular serial number was stolen out of the supply chain and somebody later comes back to try to verify that, the actual product identifier elements will match your commissioning file as a manufacturer. And so, do you respond back and say, yes, we commissioned those numbers? Or do you respond back and say, whoa, hold up, we know that this was previously stolen? And this has raised a lot of questions and concerns in the industry, because I think there's recognition of the goals and objectives of securing the supply chain, while also recognizing the operational difficulties of trying to sync and share those serial number statuses throughout the supply chain. And where we really land in the blueprint is emphasizing that if you are aware of a serial number status that impacts the saleability of that product, it should be incorporated and be a part of your verification response as a manufacturer. But we do not go so far as to say that you must kind of across the supply chain be sharing and capturing and updating those statuses, just recognizing the operational difficulties of that at this time. The other big thing that's in there is a framework for the use of what we call direct to replicate verification. So this is much more relevant to wholesalers typically, but um, if you've received the product directly from the manufacturer and have a direct copy of the manufacturer's data, can you kind of self-verify against that data? Or at what point do you have to go back to the manufacturer directly and ask the manufacturer to perform that verification? And so we've put together a framework for when that direct to replicate using that copy of the data is appropriate, and when it should be an expectation that you go back to the manufacturer. Uh, in the functional design, as I mentioned, is further extension of those additional use cases and mapping some of those out in a change request that we've provided to GS1. A recommendation to incorporate the contact information of the requesting party into that verification process, which I think will be a particular benefit in terms of helping people identify the right person in an organization to get a hold of. And so we've recommended that be incorporated into that GS1 lightweight messaging standard. And then also we'll be addressing kind of that role of credentialing in that verification process. So it's a snapshot of the verification component of the blueprint. With regard to tracing, which is probably where there's kind of the most unplowed ground when PDG started here, we've tried to put together a framework that will be coming out around tracing. So again, the idea here, and I know this has been talked about already, but today you have this building TH through the supply chain, so that when you get down to ATP4 here, they have that full set of information available to them down with all of those TIs. We'll have in 2023 is that all of those individual TIs kind of distributed out through the supply chain. And so the question with tracing is, how do you go out and actually put that together and piece all of those individual components together when they're distributed out through the supply chain? In our first chapter of the blueprint, we really focus kind of on the what requirements. Again, as I mentioned, who can trace and for what purpose? What information can be requested, and what's the output of that tracing process, and how fast is that performed? In our new chapters, we get much more detailed in terms of the actual how you can go about that request and response mechanism, laying out a general model that I'll show you, and then actually putting together kind of a request and response protocol for use in that tracing process, as well as addressing kind of that role of credentialing in that process. So first on kind of the current requirements in that chapter one that's been published, a heavy emphasis and a lot of discussion within the industry going into this blueprint around that legal authority to actually initiate that tracing process, and emphasizing that there are really three strictly defined use cases where tracing can be performed. suspect product, illegitimate, both of which can be done either by an ATP or a regulator who's involved in that investigation. Uh, and then also in the recall context, which is really initiated by a regulator under the statute. Uh, a lot of discussion then about the use of tracing for purposes beyond that. And there was a recognition that, hey, you can always put commercial agreements in place to share data beyond any sort of statutory requirement, but that is outside really of the DSCSA and our framework and does require that type of agreement to be in place among those trading partners in order to be able to share it for any sort of other purposes. And then speed was the other big one, right? A lot of conversation around, does this happen in seconds or in minutes or in hours or in days? Is this an automated process or a manual process? And where we really emphasized was this configurability component, making sure that you provide standardized methods of asking and receiving information, and then allowing a lot of flexibility inside of businesses' four walls to design their own process, determine whether they want to automate certain steps in their process and respond quickly, or have more additional human in the loop kind of processes in a process that allows a return within one business day. I'll say, as a general matter, I think most companies are recognizing that at least in the early days, there will be very much a human in the loop component to these tracing activities. We always emphasize tracing is not something that happens in a vacuum. Tracing is something that will happen in the context of a much broader, lengthy, human to human, boots on the ground kind of investigation. And so I think it's important to kind of keep that context of what that tracing process will look like within the broader context of the investigation in which it'll be used. In terms of what you'll see in our forthcoming chapters, again, our emphasis really has been on this overarching model where we call it kind of a sequential request and response model, where a trading partner or regulator who wants to go through this tracing process will send a series of requests and responses. So in this model here, right, if it's in a regulator up at the top, for example, they would make the request to ATP1, and ATP1 would say, hey, here's my data and how to get a hold of ATP2. They would then initiate another request to ATP2, who would say, here's my data and how to get a hold of ATP3, et cetera, on down through the supply chain until it's been pieced together. And our emphasis in PDG has really been on providing a standardized request and response protocol, kind of those blue lines, right? And trying to provide standardization there so that each individual company across the bottom can have their own company by company internal process. So we've tried to say, here's the standardized message you'll get, and here's the standardized message you should provide back. But how you receive that and process it, what reviews you go through, how you go about deciding whether you're going to respond at all, whether you're going to take how much time you're going to take, all of that is within your four walls and is a company by company process and decision. We've just tried to enable greater efficiency and predictability there by providing that standardized request and response protocol back and forth between that initiating entity and those individual trading partners. I know we're running down on time here, so I'll move quickly on the credentialing piece. What you'll see in the current blueprint is really focused on the requirements that are used to confirm ATP status and identity. Talked a lot about yesterday. And then the new functional design chapter coming soon will focus more on kind of the model of digital verifiable credentials as one way that you can efficiently manage that process. On the ATP side, this is the summary. There's a lot more detail in the blueprint, but actually walks through sector by sector what is checked and confirmed in order to determine that a trading partner is an authorized trading partner, duly licensed or registered. Emphasis on using that source of truth, right? Making sure you're going back to that state licensing database or some similar type of source as that source of truth against which you're checking that licensure status. A lot of conversation about, hey, what about, a chain pharmacy that has licenses in 30 states or a manufacturer that has 7 manufacturing facilities around the country? And recognizing that credentialing in our context is really about that verification and tracing component, we really emphasize on that statutory construct that says the corporate entity, the parent company, and all of the subsidiaries is the trading partner. So an emphasis on having one valid license or registration, at least one valid license or registration that you check. Um, we also talk about kind of also checking to make sure 3PLs and wholesalers are in compliance with their FDA reporting requirements, and then also address kind of how often you need to check or reconfirm that licensure status. I often frame that as, hey, if you check somebody's license today, you know they're licensed today. Can you trust and just assume that they're still licensed tomorrow? Probably. Can you trust and still just assume they're still licensed next year? Probably not, right? And so where's that balance in between? And where we landed in our blueprint was really an emphasis. I'll summarize it down and oversimplify it, generally speaking, to having a weekly reconfirmation of that license or registration status. Again, more detail on that in the blueprint if you go check it out. And then on the identity side, as was talked about yesterday, really emphasis on that NIST level 2 assurance. The last thing that I'll just note before I wrap up here is kind of how we in PDG currently are thinking about uh, this intersection of the tracing and credentialing component, which I think is one of the big points of conversation and discussion. Within tracing, again, our emphasis has been on providing that standardized request and response protocol. And we've done, kudos to Bob here, put a lot of work putting together kind of a JSON structure that can be used for that, and emphasizing that, people recognize this may be early on something that gets attached to an email, and then it provides that way to move towards more automation in a B2B or API kind of context. On the credentialing side, we've had spent a lot of time wrestling with the verifiable credential versus other processes. And ultimately, I think the general view that we continue to wrestle with, but where the conversation is headed, is a recognition that uh, verifiable credentials provide an optimal future state where there's a lot of efficiency in technological capabilities and benefits to leveraging that. And certainly, is the future state that I think has a lot of potential. But a recognition that there is an adoption curve that we're all going through, and there's a breadth of industry that may not get there in another year, in whatever Scott was just saying, year in 16 days or something to that effect. And so we really emphasize, look, at the end of the day, you need to be confirming that ATP status and identity. And you might do that in one of two ways. You may have your own individual company process, or where we hope people will move over time is to that efficiency that can be gained from verifiable credentials. So again, I just wanted to kind of paint that picture a little bit of how within PDG we've been thinking about credentialing and its intersection with tracing. So it was a very fast flyby, and I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I would encourage folks, back up this slide here, check out that link here at the bottom of the page, dscsagovernance.org/blueprint. Again, that current chapter of the blueprint is up there, publicly available. Continue to encourage feedback on it. And you should, I hope, see a number of communications over the next coming weeks as we roll out these 5 additional chapters that put more of the detail behind that. Bob, I will be quiet and try to get you back on schedule there. But certainly
Thanks,
welcome
Eric.
if you want to
Yeah,
highlight there.
for very good work from a very large team of people working together.